talk about, as we've done with all the other periods, some history first. Early modern English, which is what we're talking about. Okay? Early modern English. This, by the way, is a pretty new phrase. Early modern. It's only been in use really for about the last 50 years or so. Okay? What was it called before then? Renaissance English. Okay? But Renaissance has kind of become passé. You know, we don't like to use that because that's kind of a value judgment. You know, what was before the Renaissance, the Dark Ages, they weren't really, et cetera, et cetera. So when's it begin, though? Or when does the Middle English period end? Henry VII, yeah, kind of. 1485, Battle of Bosworth Field. Okay. Henry VII, when Henry VII defeats Richard III. So, does somebody decide at that point we're no longer speaking Middle English? No, obviously not. Okay. So when does the change begin to occur? Before Chaucer dies in 1399, 1400. From Middle English to early modern English. As with all those other periods, it's what? It's a fluid, porous border. There's no big high wall between Anglo-Saxon, Middle English, early modern English. You know, it's good word to use. It's porous. It's very porous. So early modern English begins, let's just say, in the 15th century. Because what does that mean? From 1400 to 1500. It starts in that period. Okay? When does it end? In the 18th century. So, 1400 to 1499, let's say, 1700 to 1799. It's a pretty wide range, right? Generally, most, basic introductory textbooks and such say it's, if you had to put a hardish date on it, it would be roughly, very roughly, 1500 to about 1700. Okay? But the 1700 really isn't fair. Because Samuel Johnson, who's writing in the 1750s and a little bit later, he's still early modern English. Right? So, what are some important historical things then? Well, if you have your book, it begins with some key events. Like 1534, Act of Supremacy. Yeah, well, that should maybe begin a little bit earlier. That is, historical events maybe should begin a little bit before then. Okay? So we've talked about 1485, Battle of Bosworth Field. What else? How about Henry VIII becomes king in 1509? Okay? So, supreme head of the Church of England, put civil authority above church authority, okay. 1549, Book of Common Prayer, okay. Henry's dead by that point. That's his son, Edward, who is reigning when the Book of Common Prayer is adopted. 1553, between these two, okay, Edward dies. 1553, Edward's eldest half-sister, Mary, becomes queen. This is Mary from whom we get a nickname for a drink, Bloody Mary. Okay? She dies 5 years later. And then Edward's next eldest half-sister, all different mothers, remember, okay, becomes queen, Elizabeth I, okay, reigns for 45 years, one of the longest reigning English monarchs, okay, till 1603, and she dies in 1603, and she arranges for her cousin to become king. We'll talk about him in a moment. Okay, Drake, yeah, that's important. Shakespeare, 1590, 1611. Shakespeare's born 1564. He's writing a little bit after that because 1611 is when Shakespeare finishes writing his full-length plays. But he's still helping others, okay? Shortly after that. And then he dies in 1660. 1600, East India Company. If you've seen Pirates of the Caribbean, you know all about them. I'm kidding, of course. Couple of important things. 1604, first English dictionary. It's not really a dictionary. We'll talk about that when we talk about dictionaries. 1607, Jamestown. 1611, King James Bible. That's big. Really, really big. Okay? But it's not the first Bible in English. You got to go back even before Book of Common Prayer, 1549. You got to go back to, what year was it? 1536, I think it was, when Miles Coverdale translates the New Testament into English. Okay? And then he's hunted down by the English for that. Henry VIII takes Coverdale's translation and reprints it, essentially, and at that point, translation of the Bible into English becomes acceptable. Okay? We'll talk about that a little bit later. So, some other important dates here. 1619, first African slaves arrive in North America. 42, 48, Puritan Revolution. 49, Charles is the first English king publicly beheaded. Okay? He's deposed by Parliament and then publicly beheaded. 1660, I don't know why, this date is given for this. Because this isn't the most important thing about that date. 1660 is more important because that's the year the Stuart monarchy is restored to England. That is, you have the end of what's called, they don't even have that up there, do they? Yeah, there it is. Kind of. Underneath 1642 to 48. 1649 to 1660 is a period called the interregnum. Why? Inter, between kings. It's the English Commonwealth. It's because of this that you still have today the Commonwealth of the United Kingdom. They've kept the Commonwealth idea. Okay? So what does Commonwealth mean? It's the wealth held in common. It's the land, the people, the culture, etc. Okay? So 1649, 1660, you got the Commonwealth. That's Oliver Cromwell. And then when he dies, his son, Oliver Cromwell, is Lord Protector. We've done away with kingship. But then when he dies, the Lord Protectorship devolves to his son. So, arose by any other name, king by any other name is a Lord Protector. 1660, Richard Cromwell turns the crown back over to the Stuart monarchy in the person of, Charles II. Okay? And then you get this other stuff, 1688, and we'll probably finish for today with that. The Glorious Revolution, okay? Also called the Bloodless Revolution, okay? When William and Mary are invited to England for what purpose? To become the new king and queen. Why? What happened to the old king? Well, the old king was James II. who was Catholic. Okay? And he fled when Parliament essentially let him know, we're going to replace you with a Protestant king. Okay? England had a what? An anti-Catholic bias, let's say, from roughly the early 1560s, mid 1560s, up into, I'm trying to remember when they changed the law. It's only been in like it's been in your lifetimes, like the last 20 years maybe.
Wasn't it with Elizabeth's dad?
No, I don't think so. I think it was after that.
The current queen's father?
Yeah, I think it was after that.
She was coronated in the Catholic Church.
No, she was crowned in Westminster Abbey,
Oh, that's right.
which is Anglican Church. Ever since, go back to Henry VIII, 1534.
I was watching The Crown. I've got it wrong.
Yeah, and the Crown's got a little bit wrong too. I mean, it's Netflix and it's entertainment. It's not. It's like Shakespeare. It's not history. It's entertainment first and foremost. Okay. Okay. So that's a real brief historical background. I mean, there's awful lot of other stuff we ought to talk about, but we won't. Okay. So we're with it. So let's go to focus. There we go. So you got some stuff there about the Restoration, Cromwell, et cetera, et cetera. Years of great linguistic changes, activity beginning with the Great Vowel Shift, occurring in the 16th century. That's a bit of a what do I want to call that? Overstatement, okay? Because the Great Vowel Shift begins probably sometime in the 15th century. And keeps going up until about 1700, okay? Which we'll talk about in a while, okay? So let's begin with phonology, actual sounds. And I'm going to pull the book back out in a moment or two to give some examples of these because I just don't have them in the notes. So consonant clusters continue to simplify. For example, GH. And that thing keeps getting in my way. Look at where did it go? Flow shift. Yeah. The yellow tells me to look at that. So, if you're just a little tidbit, because I think two people said they're doing something related to Shakespeare. If you're going to do something related to Shakespeare, and you're going to look at all about Shakespeare's pronunciation, or the pronunciation of English while Shakespeare was alive, Elizabethan English, in other words, you really want to look at Helga Kukeritz's, that's how you pronounce that name, Kukeritz, Helga Kukeritz's Shakespeare's pronunciation. It's a big, massive book. It's fantastic, okay? Gives you tons of examples. You also want to look at, for some of this stuff, I can give you things just off the top of my head. David Crystal, okay? Who several years ago, early 2000s, the Globe put on, Shakespeare's Globe in London, put on a series of plays in original, what they called original pronunciation. That is, the pronunciation at Shakespeare's time. Okay? Well, Globe actors don't speak Shakespearean English. That is, they don't naturally speak it. So they hired David Crystal and his son Ben to come in and essentially be speech tutors. And you can watch some of this on YouTube because they did, I think it was 4 or 5 plays, all in Shakespearean pronunciation and Elizabethan dress. So all the costuming was exactly as it would have appeared in Shakespeare's day. Okay? So, the consonant simplification I had as an example is, was the spelling GH. Okay? Now, if you remember from the Middle English, what did the Middle English spelling GH come from in Old English? Like, this came from Old English. Anybody remember? This, just this, okay? And this is that sound. It's the, okay? Well, French can't hear that, and they hear a, so they put a g in front of a k sound. So it becomes that, all right? Well, that starts to simplify. So you have examples here. Old English, Middle English, voiceless, palatal, fricative. Notice that, because we didn't talk about this, and I don't think I included this symbol in the modified IPA in the syllabus. It's this, and it's got that funny little, it's called a cedilla at the bottom of it. This is the front. It's made at the front of the mouth, as opposed to the, in Scots, loch, bach. German, ich. It's made right up near the teeth. Versus Germanic, bach, bach. It's back here. It's almost like you're trying to clear your throat. Okay? The one back in the back it's kind of like that. Okay? So, Old English, Middle English, voiceless, palatal, fricative, occurring next to front vowels, represented modern English spelling, as in Old English, this would be okay, becomes spelled this way, identically written, voiceless, velar fricative, that is, it's spelled the exact same way in Middle English, and it's spelled the exact, just an H, in Old English, okay, occurring next to back vowels. So both these sounds, the and the disappear, as in taught, bought, bow. Notice all that's being pronounced there are what? Initial consonant, a vowel, and either a final consonant, if there is one, or nothing. Okay? Or, so it simplifies, it becomes either nothing, or it becomes just cough, laugh, enough. Okay? Start in the 15th century, south of the Humber, etc., and there's examples in Cookritz. What else? MB. The B had disappeared in pronunciation before the beginning of the modern English period. So what does that really mean? Yeah, this disappears during the Middle English period. So by the modern English period, it's gone, okay? So the letter B could be added after final M where it did not etymologically belong, like in limb. Do you say, thank you, Lavandria. Do you say limb? No, and do you say bird? Well, you do say bird. I mean, you do have the D there, okay? So, similar tendency to reduce the final in D, as in lawn. Notice there's no modern English. I don't go outside and mow the lawn. But if I was living in Middle English times, I would. That's also why you see in some Middle English texts, some early modern English texts, soon, S-O-U-N and S-O-U-N-D. Okay? But notice, this one doesn't survive. L-A-W-N does. Okay? What else? The D has been added in sound in lend. Okay? So sound, this D gets added. Right? This one, L. L of the Middle English pre-consonantal AL. What does that mean? AL before something else, before consonant. Okay? The L of the Middle English pre-consonantal AL was lost after first becoming a vowel. So let's leave aside the rest of the text for a moment. Give me a modern English word that has a pre-consonantal AL. So a word has something here, AL, and then it has a consonant here. Thank you. Say it again. You guys notice the difference in pronunciation? Some of you are saying talk, talk, and some of you are saying, here, let's write it etymologically. Talk. So that it rhymes with kind of thing you cook with on a stove, which you can do while you are. I'm going to have to force my kids to watch this because they repeatedly, we'll get it and they'll start saying, so Dad, are you going to talk while you mix that egg yolk, etc.? Because they all pronounce the L's. Yeah, no. And that's because they were taught to by teachers in grade school. Why? Because it's there. If it's there, then it ought to be pronounced. My answer usually is, okay, then we'll do that to nick it. Because they're there. So why don't you pronounce those? Okay. Historically, etymologically, the page turned. Put that up there. L of the Middle English, pre-consonantal AL, notice, was lost. Historically, yeah, that L was pronounced. But it's in the Middle English period, it stopped being pronounced. Okay? After first becoming a vowel. Thus, Middle English ow and ow fell together just as AU, ultimately becoming aw. So, this is telling us this pronunciation is just talk, walk, or like cat, fat, sat, or the fat cat sat, before F and V, as in, it's not half. It's not salve, it's salve. It's not save, it's salve. Put another V and a Y on it, and you get savvy in terms of the pronunciation. Or it becomes the aw before an M, as in, it's not cam, and it's not calm, it's calm. Calm. It's not calm. The L drops off in the Middle English period. Yeah, see, your face is real going, it doesn't sound right. That's what happened. When we say calm and palm, we are inserting those L's. For the same reason, my kids insert that L there. It's a pronunciation spelling. Excuse me. It's a spelling pronunciation. We pronounce it because it's spelled that way. Historically, as a result of the Middle English. Historically, if we go back to the Old English, I don't remember what the word was for calm and palm. Notice there, I just pronounced both of them. The L retained in the spelling of these words has led to spelling pronunciation. So why is the L retained? Spelling is inherently what? I've said before, conservative. We have a hard time changing those things. Yes?
But if everybody is saying calm, if that's accepted in the vernacular, is it incorrect?
there you're bringing in a whole different issue. The idea of linguistic correctness. I'm talking about etymological correctness. Okay? Etymologically, we shouldn't be saying this and this as calm and palm. We ought to be saying them as calm and palm. Why? Because after the Middle English period, we know, for example, in Shakespeare's day, the L's weren't pronounced there. How do we know? Rhyme. We see words with C-A-L-M that rhyme with essentially C-A-M. That is, words that don't have the L. That tells us that the one wasn't pronounced. Is it possible that it's a sight rhyme or an off rhyme or a near rhyme? Yeah, but there's a preponderance of evidence that indicates that it doesn't. Okay?
So you're saying it's an evolutionary.
Yeah, because all languages what? They change. They change. Okay? So, the L retained in spelling these words has led to spelling pronunciation, particularly when it occurs before M, like these. So, what's another A-L that ends in M? Bone.
What about album?
Well, it's different because that's A-L-B.
That one always gets me there.
Okay. The L of OL was similarly lost before certain consonants by vocalization, as in folk, yoke. Notice, folk, yoke, shouldn't be homes. It's not Sherlock Holmes, it's Sherlock Holmes. Holmes. No, I don't like it, it's not right. No. Go away, Sherman. No. Post-vocalic L's are added. Would you quit doing that? Okay. L's get added. For example, here, falcon. Middle English comes from Old French, falcon. There's no L there. Okay. There's other examples, in your
This is weird.
in your book as well. Well, for example, how do you pronounce this? Is it Faulkner or Faulkner? Listening to him, because there's recordings, there's no L there in his pronunciation. Okay? How do you pronounce how do you correctly spell then his mythical county? It's Yaknapa, whatever. Is this really Y-O-K or should it be etymologically Y-O-L-K? Okay. The L in fault and vault are both added. The original of those, F-A-U-T, why? Comes from French. The L wasn't there originally. Oh, let him not debase your thoughts or name him, but to tell his thoughts. Thoughts rhymes with thoughts there. Okay, that is not, there's no way you can say that's a sight rhyme. Okay, and notice, this is Swift. When's Swift writing? Early 18th century, early 1700s. Okay. I don't think we need to do any more of those. Okay, so there's some examples of consonant clusters. What else? Final ing in Middle English, pronounced as not ing, but ing. Okay. Changes in early modern English to in. The G drops off. The G is added back in the 19th century. 19th century. It's 1800s. Okay. How? Same thing. So when teachers today talk about dropping your G's, if you're a smart-ass little kid, you could just say, well, Mrs. Jones, I'm just, speaking as Shakespeare would have. Smack F. Because, by the way, and in the early 20th century, among the British upper class, dropping that G was a class status symbol. So, for example, you can read Dorothy Sayers' detective fiction about Lord Peter Wimsey, who's a pretty high-ranking member of the British aristocracy, and he's dropping his G's all the time. But his man, Butler, I don't think that's his name. What is his name? Guy who served with him in World War I, doesn't drop his G's. Why? He's not of the right social status.
Well, today the reverse is true. Dropping your G is also an indication of social status.
How so?
When you're pronouncing your G,
Upper or lower?
lower.
Yeah, that's the ing is restored. That is, if you speak proper English, you pronounce all those final G's in ings. Okay, and notice there it's no longer ings, it's ings. Okay, what else? Vowel changes. Short vowels essentially the same, and your book gives you a chart of those. Great vowel shift affects all long vowels. So, look for a moment both at this and in that mnemonic device. My feet ache, so do ours. Okay, write that phonetically, and it looks like this. Gotta keep my mind in the right one. Right. Okay, that's modern English. The Middle English form is me, fate, ak, sa, do, urs. So this vowel does what? It shifts to become E becomes I. A becomes E. Ah becomes A. This is the ah at the bottom point of the vowel triangle. Aw, as in Faulkner, ought, etc., becomes O. O becomes oo, and oo diphthongizes. Oo becomes a diphthong. Okay? So, that's essentially what this is showing. Late Middle English, name, becomes early modern English, probably safe to say Shakespeare's English, nah, not na, nah, then it becomes ne, and then it becomes our contemporary modern English, a. Okay? So notice there's a couple of stages in here that this doesn't account for. Okay? Late Middle English, a becomes e, and it just stays the same. Late Middle English, gret, becomes a, stays to great. E becomes oi, oi, not oi, oi, which becomes I. Okay? So read, reade, roide, roid, ride. O, bote, becomes oo, it just stays the same. Bought, bought, becomes boat, stays the same. And then who, or oo, who's, becomes, this is a word, this is a sound we don't really have, so it's kind of hard to make. The difference between oo and ow, I'm trying to remember how this is made. It's like oi, oi, but it's not the oi that's here, okay? So, it takes about 200 years for this to occur. So we have all kinds of texts that are written reflecting various points of this shift, which is one of the reasons how we know the shift occurred. Okay? And the way we can go from here to here, or from there to there, is because poets are just writing on along, and how are they writing? They're writing how they speak. How many of you, when you first learned to write, or if you remember grade school and stuff, you wrote how you spoke, and then your teacher said, "Don't write like that. Write, good modern English, etc., etc." Bad teacher, That's what we tend to do initially. Okay, so they wrote how they spoke. Why didn't they write "quote unquote" correct English?
There wasn't a correct English yet.
There wasn't a standard. So where did the standard come from? I mean, we talked in the
19th century.
Before then, we talked in the Middle English period. Yeah, there's that wasp again. Yeah, he was in my class all day yesterday. He was asleep over here at the beginning of class. I was just going to let him sleep. We talked about how the standard came from the East Midlands dialect. Right? Chaucer's dialect, essentially, right? Well, Chaucer's from Canterbury, so there's a little bit of variation there, but it's East Midlands dialect. Okay, so how did that standard, quote unquote, get enforced? Well, it didn't. So, what made it the standard? What standardized it? What happened? A date I did not include, a date your text did not mention at all. What happened in almost the exact middle of the 15th century? Starting in Germany, printing press. Gutenberg invents the movable printing press. Okay? Prior to then, if you wanted a book, how did you get a book? You pay someone to make it for you. That means they kill the cows or sheep or calves, okay? They scrub the hides. They cut the vellum into the proper shape and everything. They get a stylus. They make lines on it, not with ink, but just dry point stylus. And then they have to figure out, okay, how many words will each page fit? I've got this many words in this book. Do I have enough vellum? Because I don't want to have to cut new vellum, etc. So it's a very, very time and labor intensive process. It's very expensive. But now you have a press that you can set all the type, ink it, put a piece of paper, push a platen down on it, and you've got a page. Well, you can do a whole bunch of pages in one day. And then you reset the type and you do another page. Because when you do a page, say like this, okay, you can set the type so that when you push the platen down, the type's here, you have this, you push the platen down on here, and then you do this, what have you just printed? 2 pages. Well, you can also set the type so that you can print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pages. This would be called a quire. And you would cut it here and cut it here, and you would sew it along here, and you then sew several of these together. You can look at almost any modern book. They still have this, or many of them do. Really good, expensive books do. Okay, called a Smythe sewn binding, rather than like these, which are glued bindings. Okay, so you can produce multiple books in a week. So now you've created what? We're no longer talking history of the English language. We're talking kind of economics 101. You've created a market. Why? You've created a good, a product that people say, well, I want books. They look nice. People still buy books because they look nice. They don't buy them to read. They buy them, go to a lawyer's office. I'm not taking shots at lawyers, but lots of lawyers have great big bookcases full of all kinds of books. They're not legal texts. They're designed for what? To look impressive. Okay? So you create a market. Well, what comes as a result of that market? So if books are available and you don't know how to read, you decide, I want to learn how to read. Literacy shoots up. It's, I think I've got somewhere in all of my notes, there's a statistic that I think it is by 1610, 1620, 90% of the population of England was literate. 100 years before, it was less than 10%. 90%. Guess what? It's higher than the population of the United States that is literate. We like to think, what? United States, richest country in the world. Of course, everybody's literate. Not true. Not true. Okay? So, you have that kind of literacy. Well, what else happens? Whoever owns the printing press determines / governs what? Spelling conventions. Sherman's printing, and W brings me a book, and I'm reading his handwritten text, and it's handwritten, and it's messy, and there's things crossed out, and he writes something, I'm like, why is that how you spell that word, W? And so what do? I change it according to how I spell it. Why? Because there's not a AP guide as to how to spell words correctly. If you remember, in that series of dates, 1604 is the first English dictionary. It's actually a table alphabetical of hard words. It's essentially how to spell hard words. Not a dictionary. But that's 1604. That's 120 years after the printing press arrives in England. So people have been printing stuff without any kind of, this is how you print thing, or this is how you spell thing, which is why, look at Shakespeare. Probably, if you have an edition, if you've taken a Shakespeare course, it'll be in that. Though a lot of modern editors, they will normalize some things so that you don't see variant spellings of the same word. But if you look at a copy of Shakespeare's first folio online, you'll see the word be spelled B-E, and you'll see it spelled B-E-E. Why? Is because this one is the verb and this one is the bug? No. It might be, but this one might be the bug too. So why spell them differently? Well, sometimes it's merely because the compositor, the person who lays out the type, wants the last letter to be right up against the edge of the margin. So he doesn't want to put a space there. Or he doesn't want it to look like this, because that looks retarded. All right? So you get variant spellings. When I was working on the Dun Variorum, I'd see the word flowers. every now and then it would be spelled like we spell flowers. And other times, flowers has how many syllables? Flowers, 2, right? Sometimes it would be like fluorous or fleurs or floors. I mean, I could go dig through my notes and I could probably find 10 variant spellings. Why? Because some of the copyists are living up in Scotland and they don't know how to even pronounce the English language to begin with. So they're writing Scottish English, etc. Okay? So you end up words with that normally have 1 or 2 syllables, sometimes having 3 syllables. Told the story here, my wife and I got married, I'm standing there, or I come out, and one of her cousins, 9 years old, were theirs, 10. 3 syllables, 3 letters, 1 syllable. He turns into 3. So it's something like Tay. What planet are you from, kid? South Georgia. Okay? So, that's the great vowel shift in a nutshell. How do we know? Rhyme and early modern English pronunciation. Because we have a ton of stuff. Your book includes, pretty sure it includes, a selection from what are called the Paston letters. Paston. This was a family who wrote a lot of letters for a long time. Like decades. And they kept them all. So we find out what, George and Martha are doing throughout the day. And they're writing to their children, etc. And they're writing back. And they're all preserved. Okay? That tells us an awful lot. It tells us about middle class life, but it also tells us how they pronounce certain words and things like that. Okay? Morphology and syntax. Shouldn't close this. What time is it? 9:03. This is really interesting. Let's see. That's Middle English. Prescriptive grammar. And, yeah. So this is dealing with final S indicating possession. This is page 176 in your textbook. So, many English speakers came to regard the historical genitive ending, final S, as a variant of his. So, historically, final S, Anglo-Saxon, it had an E in front of it, okay, for singular. Plural had an A, if I remember correctly, in front of it. So it's just the ending S. In its unstressed pronunciation, his was and is still pronounced without an H. Unstressed. So it gets prefaced with what? Nothing. It's just is. Tom. So that Tom bets his salary is the same as Tom bets his salary in pronunciation. Okay? So if a playwright writes, Tom bets his salary, or as Shakespeare does, Mars his sword, how's it pronounced? Mars's sword. Okay? One of the ways we know some of this is we have copies, let me rephrase that. We have texts of some of Shakespeare's plays that are called memorial reconstructions. Why? Because playwrights or actors from opposing acting companies would go and watch Shakespeare's plays. And sometimes they would sit there and they would just try to memorize the play. And then they'd leave and go home and write it all out. Or they'd send a team of players, actors, and one would go and his job would be to memorize the protagonist's lines. And somebody else would be the memorized, Ophelia's lines. And then they'd go home, they'd write down the parts they memorized, they bring it together, and then you have a bootleg copy. Okay? It's one way. Another thing they did was they would go in with notebooks and, write down as fast as they can. Okay? Well, you hear Tom Betts' salary, and you don't write down that. Tom Betts his salary, Tom Betts apostrophe S salary, because you're eliding. You think that's what's going on. Okay? What speakers began to think of Mars' armor as a variant of Mars' armor? What happens? They start to introduce the apostrophe. So, this gets confused with this. How do we know? Because sometimes we see this. A feminine or female agent with a male pronoun after. Well, that doesn't make any sense. But it shows up. So we know what happened. Okay? That's how we know what happened. His with its variance is it is with much more common in this construction than there or there. Skip, go down to the bottom. So what happens as a result of that? You get the his genitive, whichever pronoun, whether it's his, hers, their, is used, was most prevalent with proper names, although the his genitive in Old English must have been the sort of topic comment construction talked about above. What? That's what eventually leads to the apostrophe S form, which is why the apostrophe S form is entirely wrong. And that leads to what? The thing that, still kills students. And I don't mean 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, college students. Even when I was editing a scholarly journal, people with PhDs would send in things and have for possessive. And I'm like, no! If I have any quote-unquote gifts or anything like that, in teaching or scholarship, it's editing. I'm a born editor. I cross things out, I correct things. I get brand new books, and I'm reading on along, and I'll find, and I'm like, come on, you're paid $1 billion to copy edit this kind of stuff. Fix the things. This versus this, okay?
Couldn't have said that at the beginning of the semester when we could have dropped that class.
I'm pretty sure I did.
For an editor.
Pretty sure I did. What else? Dual third person singular endings. Ev, my cup runneth over, okay? Versus the Old Norse form. And sometimes final S with plurals. They talks. Or we talks. Sometimes. And your book gives examples of that. I just don't include them. Okay? But this gets really interesting. The pronouns. The difference between the Y forms and the TH forms. Okay? So, what do I mean? Problems, confusion with second person pronouns. You, thou, ye, they. Ye, thee. So you have the increasing use, where is that in here? You have the increasing use of you, ye, which are originally, there it is, originally Middle English forms of nominative and accusative cases. So this is nominative, this is accusative. Christ doesn't say, "O you of little faith." What's he say? King James English. "O ye." Notice, by the way, King James English, it's doing what there? It's being deliberately archaic. Okay? So, increasing use of these Middle English forms of nominative and accusative as what? Formal pronouns. Formal. So you're speaking to somebody high, somebody in authority, power, etc. These, thou, thee, thine, informal. And I'm going to put the book up on the overhead in a moment. Okay? These case distinctions start to drop off. Why? Because they're not pronounced you, ye. They're pronounced what? Yeah. Neither you nor ye. They both kind of get pronounced in speech. Yeah. Why? Because you usually don't emphasize something like that. What do you know? We spell that how, if you're going to spell it. Yeah. Y-A, Y-U-H, like duh, yeah, duh. Eventual loss of the TH forms of second person pronouns, right? How many of you go up to your friend and say, how art thou doing today? You don't. How are you doing? Unless religious use. And there are some religious groups today that do use this in speech. Okay? Amish, for example, use the TH forms. And a lot of churches use it where? In prayer, in religious services. Okay? Proper verb form for the second person. That's what my grandmother always used. Always. You was. She got through 8th grade. Okay? As opposed to you were. Okay? So, look at this. Now. So the loss in ordinary language, singular thou, thee, thy, thine, created a gap. Okay? Shift in the use of thou and ye. So, beginning in the 13th century, notice, plural forms, plural, ye, you, your, what were the singular? Thee, thou, thine, okay, or thine, began to be used with singular meanings in circumstances of politeness or formality. So you used ye, you, and your to be polite or to be formal. Okay? That left the singular forms, thou, thee, thy, thine, for what? Intimate, those that you were very close with, or familiar use. Familiar, non-formal, colloquial, street use, so to speak. Okay? So that starts in late 13th century. The English historical Y forms were used in addressing, okay, Y, the you, ye, your, were used in addressing a superior, somebody above you, whether, notice, social status or age. Why? Why age? Because you respect your elders, that's why. Okay? And that doesn't matter whether the person is 20 years older or maybe 5 years older. You'll see this in Shakespeare. He has, for example, in As You Like It, Orlando uses the Y form frequently in speaking to his older brother, Oliver. His older brother isn't that much older, if I remember correctly. Okay? What else? So, use the Y forms for social status, age, or if you were in the upper class, you would use it among each other. Okay? Though highborn lovers might slip into the TH forms in situations of intimacy. Cool. So the TH forms are used by older people to younger people, and by socially superior people to socially inferior people. Now that tends to be exactly the opposite of what we think is the case. We think the TH forms are what you use to speak to a superior. Think of the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come. So why is it thy? Okay. Why else? It's familiar. When Christ teaches that prayer, he's teaching his disciples, right? Because they asked him, how do you teach us how to pray? Because how does he pray? Abba in the New Testament. What's that mean? Father, Daddy, and Papa. That's familiarity, right? Okay? So, Hamlet, speaking to his mother, okay, This is when he goes up to her closet. Polonius is there. And she says, Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended. TH forms, older to younger, socially superior, socially inferior. Mother to son is what this is showing us. Also, queen to prince. Superior, inferior. If they still use this today, you could put Queen Elizabeth, Charles. This is how she would speak to him. Mother, you have my father much offended. Okay, so go back to the wives. Why? Used with singular meaning to indicate politeness or formality. Okay? What else? Addressing a superior by virtue of social status or age. So he's doing all of those things. It's formality. What's Hamlet? If it's just formality he's showing there, what's Hamlet doing? He's distancing himself. Okay? Come, you answer with an idle tongue. So now she uses the Y form. Why? Upper class circles among equals. Well, they are the royal family. There isn't anybody more equal than them, so to speak. What wilt thou? Inferior again. Shakespeare does this all throughout his plays. He's using the various pronoun forms, how? As signals. How to understand the relationships among the people in the plays. Now, did his entire audience at the time get it? Probably not. Does his entire audience today get it? If you go to the National Shakespeare Festival and watch the people out in the grass, goes over their heads. Because lots of times he'll take this and he'll play with it. He'll play with these kinds of distinctions. Okay? What time is it? 9:18. Okay, we talked about this before with you. Middle English, possible preservation of the Old English hymn, as in you got them. Some scholars think so. I mean, it's included in your textbook. I'm not enough of a scholar of the history and development of the English language to say that it is or isn't. I'll just kind of go with the consensus. Development of 8 drives my mother-in-law absolutely bananas when I talk about this, because she taught grade school for 36 years. She taught music, but every now and then she got in on this too. Development of 8 in the 17th century. Notice, 8 is a perfectly good contraction. If what? If it's used correctly. You wouldn't say, we isn't, right? Why not? We is not, because that's not grammatically correct English. Similarly, you wouldn't say, you ain't. Why not? You'd saying you am not. That's not grammatically correct English. Ain't is what? I am not. That's all it is. Contracted. So why isn't it ain't? Well, look how it's spelled. This can represent 2 sounds in English. It can represent a. It can also represent I. Ain't. So historically, it's probably pronounced that way. Ain't. I am not. The only reason it's frowned upon today is because people say, we ain't, you ain't, they ain't, which are all grammatically incorrect. I've even told my kids, if they're writing papers or if they're talking in class, go ahead and say ain't. Just say it correctly. And then if your teacher says something, teach them. Explain to them how it should be used. My wife's like, don't do that. Okay? Shall, will. Couple minutes. Artificial usage of will in first person. What does that mean? I will, you shall. Notice, it's artificial. It's just as fine to say, I shall, you will. But what's the difference? I will, you shall. Okay? Shall implies obligation. So if I say, Paige shall do something, yeah, exactly. I'm laying that obligation on her. But if I say, I will do something, that means I have the choice to. You shall removes the choice. Okay? Thou shalt not lie. There's no choice there. It's don't. Okay? Doesn't say you will not lie, because what does that mean? You can't. It's impossible to. The volition has been removed. Okay? Yeah, we'll start this. So, part 2. Oh, there's the. I wondered, why did I start that before? It's been so long since I've taught this class. I forget things. So, reasons for development in English during this period. Gutenberg's Bible, 1456. Caxton, 1474. Caxton sets up shop in London. Originally, he's in the Netherlands. Okay. Gutenberg, by the way, doesn't invent movable type. That's invented by Chinese, about 900. But their movable type was kind of block type. And there was block type in England during the Middle Ages, but not type in the sense of a printing press. It was block type like you can get today. Go to a crafts or hobby store and you can get the stamps, right? And you can stamp stuff. Well, it would take an awful long time to produce a book that way. So he invents the printing press. Okay? Humanistic education stressed languages, classical and modern. So what's an example of a classical language? Latin? Greek? Yeah, that's it. Because they didn't know Sanskrit really. Not yet. Okay? Modern? What was a pretty hip modern language to know in the 16th century? If you're on the 16th century hip reading list. Italian? French? German? Yeah, Spanish, but Spanish was kind of frowned upon. Do I have it up here? Yeah, comes up pretty close because of the Spanish Armada. Okay? So, if you are going to receive a quote-unquote good classical education, you're going to learn probably Latin and Greek, and you'll probably pick up a smattering of some European languages. Okay? We know, for example, let me rephrase this. We believe Shakespeare attended the local grammar school probably until about the age of 11 or 12. I say we believe because there are no records that Shakespeare actually attended it. His name doesn't show up on any rolls. But his father was mayor of the town. It kind of means he probably, he got in by hook or crook. The whole elite schools admission scandal. Yeah, that's not new. So what does that mean? It means that by the time he left at the age of 11, 12, if he was slow, maybe 13. If he was fast, maybe 10 or 11. Shakespeare would have had as much Latin and or Greek as a student today graduating from, say, Sewanee with a degree in classics, majoring in classics, Latin and Greek. Okay. 4 years college education, Shakespeare would have essentially had with 6 years grade school education. Well, how is that done? They focused on, and after the first 2 or 3 years, most of the classes are conducted in Latin. Okay? Well, how do you do that? Well, you translate, and you translate, and you translate, and you memorize, and you memorize. And if you don't memorize right, you get smacked. Okay? We'll stop there. We'll pick up with this on whatever day. Thursday. I'll have your exams for you also on Thursday.